All right, we are in track one. I'm Zach. If you don't know me, I'm Zach. So we're going to talk about cybersecurity considerations for small businesses. And of course, if you follow, no, sir.
Need a little bit louder because you don't have a mic on.
Where's your mic? I'll stand next to you. All right, so this is track one, and we're going to talk about cybersecurity considerations for small businesses. And the speaker is Nick Burrows, the Director of Operations and Chief Technology Officer at Total Care IT. And remember, small businesses are the backbone of America. They are also the soft underbelly of all of our industries here. And so whether some people believe it or not, your partners are also your biggest liability and vice versa. So we need to all understand the things that you know. Thank you very much, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, sir. All right, this has been such a fun day. I've been in this room most of the day. I saw the incident response presentation. If you missed that, you missed something good. Saw regulation bingo, where somebody who works with compliance regulations on a daily basis got schooled by children. And now I'm here to do this presentation. Oh, the keynote was phenomenal. I missed the lightning talks. I have a 3-year-old who had to go to a birthday party, and so I was helping my wife with the baby. But I'm here to talk about cybersecurity considerations for small businesses. As mentioned, my name is Nick Burrows. I work for Total Care IT, and before I get too far into it, I just want to give you guys the frame of reference that I'm coming from. So Total Care IT is a managed service provider. And what that means is we provide outsourced IT services to small businesses. We serve about 60 clients, most of which are in Idaho, but we do have clients that are fully remote. We have one client that's a cattle processing plant in Nebraska. We use 2 different models. One is we're the IT department for a small business. They hire us if they have something breaks. They call us. We do projects. We are responsible top to bottom for all of their IT solutions. The other model is co-managed, where they may have an in-house IT team. Maybe they're doing the boots on the ground, the level 1 troubleshooting. We get the escalations, we get the projects, we get managed security, manage their servers, things like that that might be out of their expertise or harder to source. And then we can also backfill. So, IT people working for small businesses can take vacations. I know in my experience working for a small business as an IT person, the first time I tried to take a vacation, I got off the plane in Oakland and had to figure out how to fix the power supply of the accounting server from 2,000 miles away. So it's not often. But Total Care was founded in 2007, so we're 18 years, just I think this week actually. Our founder is a gentleman named Aaron Zimmerman. He is still our president and owner. He came from corporate IT. He worked as a contractor for HP out in California. He worked for Nuance. And he wanted to create a business to bring enterprise level IT solutions to small businesses. And that has evolved to also providing enterprise level cybersecurity solutions to small businesses. We manage over 1,700 endpoints. I mentioned clients are all over, some fully remote. And one of the things that we've recently started is our own private cloud or co-located compute that's in a tier 3 data center in Boise. So we're working on our SOC 2 certification specifically around that service offering. My job title's changed in the last 6 months. I guess I'm now the principal technical and security architect. I got my job split. I was like drowning trying to manage operations and manage the technology and security. And so I said, please. And so we have someone who's doing our day-to-day operations, and then I'm doing the engineering and compliance pieces. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science from the University of Pennsylvania, MBA, and Master's of Accountancy from ISU. And I've got 15 plus years of direct IT experience. I spent 8 years managing the IT for a small business, a nonprofit here in Eastern Idaho. I moved to the program side for several years. I have experience. I worked for a charter school as their chief financial officer for a while, and then came back to IT when I came to Total Care IT about 5.5 years ago. The slide's out of date. I was working on my CISSP, but I've tabled that for a little bit because CMMC is a huge opportunity that's waiting around the corner. So becoming a certified CMMC professional seems more pertinent to what I need to do. So, but then I'll jump back into the CISSP stuff. So I want to know who's here, just to get a sense. Does anyone here work for a small business? Okay. What industries? Just okay. 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 What about okay? Who here works for like large enterprise IT? Not IT. Okay, yeah, like a large enterprise, you'll find people who are like your network admin and your systems admin and your service support desk and everything. It's very boxed roles. Anyone in government or quasi government? Okay. Education. Anyone students? Okay. Did I miss anything? And what do you got? What about you? Okay, independent consultant. Okay. Is there anything specifically that brought you here today instead of learning about hacktivists or enjoying outdoors or going to the villages? What was that? Okay.
Since it is a small business, it really didn't have any infrastructure, almost no infrastructure 6 months ago, and now we're rebuilding everything. They had some major problems.
That's so familiar.
I can to try to.
So familiar. Yep.
I'm looking to career change into cybersecurity. Recent graduate from here, and
Okay.
in nuclear for a decade.
Okay. Is there anything specific anyone was hoping to learn? Okay, just want to make sure that I meet the expectations. So what I'm going to do is I chose kind of 6 general areas of cybersecurity, and when we get into it, we're going to just decide as a group which ones you want to talk about, and this is going to be more of a discussion. I'm going to let you know what I usually encounter when we go get a new client. These can be clients that have had no IT. These can be clients that are startups. These can be clients that have had a managed service provider or have had in-house IT. And usually it's almost always the same thing. We almost always experience very, very similar things. So I'm going to tell you what I experience, and then I want to learn from your guys' expertise and have the room, your experiences. What would you do to help that client? And then I'll tell you what we do. I'm not gonna talk about any specific products. I'm not gonna like tell a specific client that we serve. So I got to keep our solution stack a little secret, but I'll talk about the technologies that we deploy. The other thing to note is that we only use vendor-supported solutions. The reason for that, we're not going to deploy a bunch of open source things because as soon as you have turnover, if you've deployed an open source solution, chances are the guy who deployed it is the only one who knows how to use it. And then there's not a community or vendor to help train the next person. And so we kind of find ourselves in a lurch when we've done that. So vendor supported. And then the other thing is you're not going to find, this is the only time I'm going to mention vendors, and not because of any bad reason, you're not going to find CrowdStrike or SentinelOne in one of our environments. Not because they're bad, but because we find that the bigger vendors have bigger targets. They're more likely to be subject to zero-day vulnerabilities because there's more effort trying to find the exploits. So we're going to use smaller vendors in our solutions just so that it's a little smaller target for the bad guys. So before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about what makes a small business different than other businesses and large businesses, specifically enterprise. So the biggest difference is that top line, the governance. Small businesses are going to be almost always owner operated. There are small businesses that have C-level suites, just depending on where they're coming from, but they're almost always owner operated. And that is a huge difference when you're dealing with decision making than when you're dealing with people who are at a C-suite level that have a board of directors. Because the people that are owner operated, they're like, every dime I spend that is not critical is money I don't bank at the end of the year. C-suite people are like, yeah, we want to have maximize revenues, we want to maximize profits, especially if we have investors, but I'm getting my salary regardless. As long as I perform well, I'm getting paid. Maybe I'll get a bonus, but it's not nearly as critical, especially when you're dealing with things that have smaller margins as well. Small businesses hardly ever have an IT budget. If they have one, it's very small. In enterprise, IT has become a necessity and it's become an investment. So there's usually a higher budget. I know when I was trying to move our nonprofit small business into the new century or millennium 20 years ago, the number was roughly 3% of our budget was supposed to be in IT. And we were at 0.5%. So there was a lot of growth that needed to happen. IT team, you often don't have one, or if you do, it's one person. And I don't know about you, but does anyone here know everything? Well, if you're the one person, that's all your IT department knows. If you're in a larger organization, you have a lot of people to be able, so people can learn expertises. And I remember last year, actually, and just as a shout out, I remember Joseph pointed this out from his IT experience, that when he started, you had to know everything. And now you have very granular defined roles, and you only have to know what's in those boxes. And that's one of the big shifts of the last 20, 25 years. IT tools, typically you're going to have very simple tools, cost-effective tools. Not that's a bad thing. An enterprise, they're usually going to have layered. Larger budgets mean larger tools and larger scalability. Risk tolerance, small businesses, like I said, very low risk tolerance. That's if they lose anything, they're panicking now. Loss is loss. Nobody wants to, but the risk tolerance for an enterprise is a little bit higher. And then from compliance, and not to say that the small business doesn't have compliance. The concern over compliance for a small business is very low. They don't realize what they don't know. In enterprise, depending on where they're going, I mean, we had a presentation earlier today. If you're doing work in Europe, you have a whole lot of compliance that you have to follow that's different than if you're only doing work in the United States, for example. So there's complex multi-regulatory compliance. And so those are some of the differences. And this matters largely because the decisions come from a different place, but the concerns are the same. To be completely honest, a small business has to worry about the exact same things as a large business. The problem is they don't. And so that's where a company like Total Care or an IT professional and proactive person would come in and say, this is important. If you don't follow this, if you don't pay attention to this, you're either going to be liable or you're going to go out of business. These are realities. No business is too small to target. There are literally services on the dark web where you don't have to know anything but how to find it, where you can buy ransomware kits. And for a share of the profit, you pay like $200 to get the technology, and you set up your little server on AWS or Azure or wherever you want to put it, and it'll just flood, and it'll start exploiting and casting wide nets. Same thing with phishing services. I mean, it's a commodity. The attacks are coming from a commodity now, and so $50,000 for no effort is worth just as much to them as $10 million for 6 months of effort. The compliance requirements are growing. Just a couple of things. I don't want to go too deep into the compliance, but we have CPA firms for our clients. We don't have car dealerships, but they fall in the same thing. Basically, anyone who trades consumer information as far as like credit ratings, banks, they're all required to comply to what are called FTC safeguards. The FTC safeguards, unlike HIPAA before them, have actually criminalized negligence. If there is an exfiltration of data and there is data loss that affects consumers, and you can't prove that you did your due diligence and did your best effort to protect that data, you can not just get fined, but you can get criminal penalties. So that's changing. It's something that hasn't always been around, and that's fairly new, last 2-3 years. The other thing is that we have to keep in mind for small businesses, especially, that one size doesn't fit all. I'm not going to do the same thing for a 3-person law firm as I'm going to do for an 80-person engineering firm. However, I need to listen to them the same way. I need to make sure that they understand the risks, and I need to make sure that they understand how they can be protected economically. So, and then the last thing, the biggest thing that we're hearing now, beyond regulations and being able to maintain contracts, is the number of people who are starting to sue. If you're part of a breach and you're named in the breach, they're suing the person culpable for the breach or the company. They're suing the IT providers. And we're also hearing about insurance companies starting to sue their clients for putting in claims when they didn't follow the conditions of the policy that they said they were following. And so now they're suing them for misrepresentation. So that we are becoming much more litigious. So for small businesses, this is stuff that people need to start paying attention to. And so that's why it matters. So the 6 areas that I thought we could talk about, and we can choose any of these, but complexity and infrastructure, user behavior and training, access and identity management, security stack, compliance and governance, and threat landscape. Where would you guys want to start? I can start at the top, or we can bounce around. Sweet. All right. Yeah. I saw there was a NIST presentation last year where the guy had like 3 or 4 different scenarios. And I was like, that's such a cool idea. I'm going to do it that way. His was much more graphically appealing because it was like a role play game. But like, so what we usually find is sometimes we get strong passwords. Sometimes. Never ever find password managers. Maybe there's like the one person that has the Excel spreadsheet, or they might have LastPass, which makes me cringe, but that's okay. Sometimes they require MFA, sometimes, and that's limited to their like 365 or Google Workspace. Very rarely, unless we find Active Directory is already in place because at some point they felt they needed an on-premise server, they're usually always local admin accounts or local accounts. They're usually always local admins with no privilege access management. I didn't put that up here. And then remote access usually consists of a client VPN, remote desktop, and maybe they'll have cloud services. So fragmented identity access management, because each cloud service is going to have its own username. They're not doing any type of single sign-on or SAML or OAuth or anything like that. And usually they have no centralized control over password complexity, password rotation, password management, things like that. If you guys were walking into this and saying, hey, we're your new IT provider, how would you address this? Password training, yeah.
And then we went through everybody's office and ripped off the passwords underneath their keyboards and monitors.
No one could log in.
And then we have a lot of filing cabinet because there's 12 staff.
Oh, my favorite one that I get that I didn't put on here is it was that. It's that, except it's usually not the CEO. It's usually the person who processes payroll. They have everyone's password and to their computers, to their emails and everything. Literally had this conversation this week. I'm like, we need to enforce security defaults so that we don't have to manually make people sign up for MFA. And he goes, and the person said, well, I need all of the MFA to go to my cell phone. And I said, why? And I'm like, because I have to log into their email. I'm like, why don't we just delegate their mailbox to you then? You don't have to log in. They haven't answered yet. So what are you going to say?
I just had something similar to this happen recently where we implemented password or advanced passwords and
Yeah.
for to everyone working there, and how difficult it was to make sure everyone could get into their computers and start using MFA, and really thought I was the villain of the day for sure.
Yeah. One of the things that I find interesting when it comes to like this and like password complexity specifically is the conflicting information that you get. And I don't know if it's because of like the profit center, but like you get like the password managers or like password hygiene. You got to rotate your password every 90 days. You got to do this, like strong, complex passwords. And I agree. Long, strong passwords must have them. But then Microsoft stands over here and they're like, don't rotate your passwords. Don't turn that feature off. Don't make them. Don't require password rotation, because then people will do easier passwords, more simple passwords, so they don't forget them. And I'm like, where in the middle am I supposed to meet? When I have 90% of my clients are in Microsoft and they're telling me to do this, and I have to turn this on by default, but all the best practices say, including all the regulations that we learned about, say to do password rotation. So MFAs, yeah, for sure. So what we'll do, we try to connect devices to Entra to do a formal centralized IAM. Regardless of whether or not they're in a Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 shop, Entra can be free as long as you connect it. You don't have to license anything. So we try to get user devices connected to Entra if they don't have Active Directory. As far as the remote workforce, I cringe now when I hear client VPN. I can't remember who it was, but they started using Kali Linux with a service offering, and I can't remember what it was. But they started. It's an AI service that runs on Kali Linux, and it's flooding to identify client VPN connections, and trying to just flood and do like brute force attacks to try to get in through client VPN. So anyone that's like connecting to their gateway, I'm like, ooh, there's better ways to do this. So one thing that we'll do, if we have people who need to take their device off premise and they need to be able to access centralized servers or centralized resources, or even for conditional access, we'll put what's called a secure access service edge, or SASE. We put an agent. And what that does, and it's really cool technology, is I call it a VPN on steroids, especially when it's done right, because not only does it give you that central connectivity, but it also gives you things like content filtering, secure DNS, and all sorts of other services to make sure that their traffic is secure. It's like taking your corporate firewall with you no matter where you go. So I run SASE on this box. I can go to Starbucks, jump on their public Wi-Fi, and I'm not worried. Now, if I turn my SASE agent off, hopefully I close my bank account. So the other thing that we'll do is we do a centrally managed remote access solution. As an MSP, we use what's called a remote management monitoring system, RMM. And using that, we're able to leverage a remote access solution that does the authentication at the RMM and then connects via the agent that's already installed. So there's no communication with the gateway. So I don't have to open ports to be able to allow people to access their devices remotely. And by doing those two things, we've done a lot to remove security concerns that may have been open when someone thought, hey, let's just open port 3389, who cares? So, are there any questions about access and identity management? Oh, we also, I don't know if it's in another area, but we do also offer a password manager. From a compliance standpoint, it's very important that everyone uses the same password manager so that you can report on the complexity of people's passwords and following those passwords. If you're not using an enterprise central password manager, you're trusting people and you have no reportability, and you're never going to get those checkboxes if you have an audit. So we will go back. Yeah. Where which? Zero Trust. Yeah. Yeah, we actually, I love Zero Trust, and I hate it at the same time. Zero Trust is the only way that I know that I can protect a computer and a device from a bad actor. Because of 0 days, because even your EDR and NGAV is only going to know what it knows, what it's been able to learn. It's kind of like that AI presentation. It's only as good as the inputs that people have been able to put in there. If I do Zero Trust, where I'm only explicitly allowing the things that I say are okay, whether it's you running this program, you opening these types of files, or you accessing these resources, by doing whitelisting instead of deny listing. It's the only way I know that you can have truly a locked down and secure environment that, not going to say it's unbreakable, but it's as close to unbreakable as you're going to get in today's landscape. But convincing people that it's worth it's worth the annoyance is hard. Yep. Yeah, we had standardized to zero trust and application whitelisting program, and we've loosened a little bit. But what's the next area you guys want to talk about? Yeah. Sweet. All right, so I've got a little bit more here. Typically what we're going to find in small business, very flat network. Everything's going to be on the same network. Usually one subnet, probably not any VLANs. Guest Wi-Fi, if it exists, can talk to the production Wi-Fi. Usually doesn't exist though. And they usually have their Wi-Fi password on the reception desk. If they have a Wi-Fi password. And typically, we're going to find the ISP's gateway device. They're not going to have any type of firewall outside of that. They're going to use that for routing. There's not a lot of computers, so that's why the flat network probably is okay. A lot of times they're going to be cloud first, so they're going to be doing things like Office 365 or Google Workspace, maybe a couple of cloud vendors. There's not a huge client server market anymore in a lot of our clients, but that is industry specific too. And then usually there is not any type of device policy. And what I mean by that is you probably don't have any type of group policies or Intune deployment or device management. And you may have very little basic vendor relationships. And they probably are just going to the vendor that seemed to have the solution that was cheapest, that worked for them, instead of doing any type of vetting as far as where the supply chain was coming, what they're doing on the back end, how they're using the data, things like that. And I'm not saying I can solve all these problems, by the way. What would you guys do with this type of environment? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, definitely secure the Wi-Fi. If you are going to have any type of public or shared password, make sure that that's on a segregated VLAN or subnet or both. And ideally, you also don't let those devices talk to each other and whatnot. Any other ideas? Yeah, just
So I was just gonna mention, we had a client working for a large state agency that had multiple, in this case, they had multiple districts, each of which kind of grew up itself. They got everybody in the same private IP space, but it's still, you have like a single district had like the equivalent of a Class B.
Oh yeah.
Like available to them, and you could sit on, because we're in a red team that pen test on.
Yeah.
And you could from inside, you could connect to any of their other districts.
Okay.
And one of the problems, they said, we know we have a site condition issue, but it's too costly. And granted, they're a large state agency, but the same thing, even in a smaller environment, I think applies probably to small businesses. They're like, infrastructure, modified infrastructure seems to be one of the most costly things, because it's also one of the highest risks that you're going to mess something up, and now they can no longer get to where they need to go.
Yeah.
And so I recommended software-defined networking and being able to do like some incremental changes to their infrastructure, rather than doing we're going to take everything down on Friday and we'll all be at
100%. That's another scenario where what I talked about before with SASE, with the Land Zero Trust, you could really leverage a tool like that too. Because with the SASE, one thing I didn't talk about that it does is Land Zero Trust, where you can actually, you authenticate into the SASE agent and you can define you're only allowed to talk to these things. So you prevent your lateral movement, and you also are able to, through Zero Trust, define what resources people are able to talk to. and that's all done software based, and so you don't have to do a large infrastructure project.
And some of the vendors too, like the big ones that are maybe out of the price range of small business, Palo and Cisco, they offer some really good transitional services, sort of baseline your network, and they'll baseline for a week or two or something
Yeah.
like that. And so they'll actually predict, they'll give you here's the recommended segmentation
Yeah.
configuration, and then they can show you how the baseline adheres to that.
Yeah.
Communication patterns and stuff.
But yeah, the varying complexities and everything. We don't. I mean, we do have multi-site clients. We've got a client that has an office here in Idaho Falls and an office in Austin, Texas. The people in Austin have to access server resources here in Idaho Falls. There's a server down in Austin that some of the people in Idaho Falls have to access, and making sure that you are securely segmenting those things and allowing those resources to be connected efficiently and effectively, but also making sure that Betty in HR isn't able to access the engineering resources. That's important as well. So what we'll do is we try to do as much with network segmentation. In order to do that, though, we're going to have to pull the ISP provided device and put something else in. Now, what we have found, especially over the last 3-ish years, we were putting in big unified threat management systems with the subscriptions and everything. We were a big sonic wall shop, and we have found that the attacks are hitting endpoints, not gateways anymore. And so by locking down the endpoints with good EDR, good XDR, good SOC SIM services, zero trust or good privileged access management, that's more important than trying to protect the end or the gateway. So we have simplified, and we use, I think they're very good machines, but they're not necessarily the most expensive. They don't carry large subscriptions and things like that. That's one thing that we will do, and it's very appealing to the small business, because for the same price as that annual subscription that you're getting from Palo Alto or SonicWall or Sophos or Fortinet, you're getting the device once, and it'll last for 4 or 5 years before it has to be replaced. But we try to make sure that we have the proper threat management capabilities. We're able to use our RMM to enforce a lot of that configuration standardization. There are a lot of tools. You can use Intune, or you can use your RMM. Our RMM that we use, the particular one, they bake in about 300 scripts that you can just be like, oh, I want to use that one, and I can use that to turn off USB devices. And it just runs the script, and then USB devices are turned off, for example. RMM is Remote Management and Monitoring System. In my world, where I have 60 clients that are anywhere from 5 minutes to 5-hour flight from me, being able to gain all of the metric data as far as performance centrally, and be able to report on it, and be able to know what devices are online, offline without having to leave and drive or fly, it's critical. And that's what the RMM does for me. So, but you can use an RMM even as a smaller IT shop. If you're an enterprise, like I would imagine that the IT people at the INL have some form of RMM that's inventorying all of the assets, device health, things like that. But and then the other thing that we try to do, now this isn't something that a lot of people want to pay for, especially in the small business space, but we try to do a risk assessment. And at the very least, we'll inform them of risk informally, but we do try to offer a service where early on, we will do a top to bottom risk assessment from where they are, so that they can then see over the course of 12 months where we get them. So any other, but we try, but the big ones that we do from the complexity is we try to recognize that even though they're small, that doesn't mean that they need to be dumb and have a flat network where a lateral movement can happen. One of the ransomware incidents that we remediated was someone who got in through a client VPN, and they just were able to laterally move side to side. It was a seasonal worker whose client VPN account should have been disabled, wasn't, and they just were And so because of that, what that person had going on at home affected the business. So, all right. We'll do one more. Oops. Which one do you want to do next? Security stack? Okay. Oops. We'll usually see antivirus. A lot of times it's Microsoft Defender, and there's nothing wrong with Microsoft Defender. It's even better if you have like Business Premium or the Defender add-ons. But they don't have any type of EDR, or if they do, it might be a basic EDR. Almost no monitoring at all. Very, very rarely are we going to see anything that looks like anything like a SIM. Individual backup data, so they'll be like, oh, I've got stuff in Dropbox, or I've got stuff in OneDrive. And never do we see a disaster recovery or business continuity plan. But I've never gotten an answer of what's your recovery point objective without having to tell them what that means. Yeah. EDR is endpoint detection and response. So to put it this way, your antivirus, which we now call next gen antivirus if it's using heuristics and learning models, it's basically looking at behavior instead of file signatures. That's looking at what is actively being done, but it's limited to the activity. Like I open this file and the EDR or the AV is going to scan it. But there's a whole classification of things that run in memory, and they can be malicious and they can have malware. So your EDR is going to have heuristics to be able to monitor, scan for that. It's similar in scope to, it's not just responding to what happens, it's looking for behavior that might be happening that's not user interactive. They work hand in hand. We actually, our EDR solution is also our AV solution. We don't say that they're separate. But what you do with that data matters as well. So. Typically, as far as a recovery objective, depends. I mean, it really depends on how much got hit. The one ransomware, I'm thankful and fortunate that I have not had to do a lot with ransomware, but the one ransomware that I did have to remediate, fortunately, they had just been forklifted up into the cloud, to a cloud hosting environment. So, and all of the data that was exfiltrated was already encrypted. So there was no data loss, and the servers that were encrypted, all the production data had already been moved. So it was a very easy remediation for us. But I know here in town, Hospice of Eastern Idaho got hit with ransomware, and it was about a 5-week initial resolve. And I think it took 6 months to actually say that everything was closed out. But they worked off of paper and pencil for about 5 weeks. And that's a nonprofit. That's really heartless. So, but yeah, so small businesses, it's tough. But as far as what we do, we're definitely going to make sure that there's NGAV and EDR. We're going to make sure the EDR, Active Directory, if it's present, 365. Okay, cool. Excellent. AD, 365, Google Workspace, it all feeds into a SIM. We connect our SIM to a SOC team. Our specific vendor, their SOC team are all retired military people out of Augusta, Georgia. So they're transitioning from the military to the business world and civilian life, and so they hire them. It's pretty cool. No, they do have a different mindset, but what they're looking at is threats, and they're looking at the data that I wouldn't want to look at all day. We'll deploy vulnerability management solution. One thing that's nice about that is you just plug this agent on every device, and it's going to track third-party solutions, operating system vulnerabilities, alert to it, and then about 95% of the time, it's a push of a button on our end to say, hey, install that patch, install that patch. And so we are able to manage that much more efficiently to be able to keep the vulnerabilities minimized. They're only going to know vulnerabilities based off of CVEs. So any 0 days aren't going to be hit by that or covered by that. The other thing that we do is back up your 365 or Google Workspace environment. One thing that, and I've gotten into arguments with people about this, but Microsoft and Google they're going to protect your data because it's in their best interest, but there is nothing in your agreement with your acceptable use agreement or your service agreement with them that says that they're responsible for maintaining your data. So if you accidentally delete a file in your 365 and you accidentally delete the 30 days and say, oh, I don't need that file anymore. And then the next day you're like, oh, I need that file. Microsoft's gonna be like, tough. They have nothing to recover that. So we're dealing with humans, so we back up that environment so we can go back 30 days and say, oh yeah, that file was deleted. Well, I can pull it from this day. So, and then the other thing that we'll do is we provide assistance in developing a backup business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Main thing that involves is where do you want your backup data to go? We, by default, will back up data to a local network share and AWS in an immutable form. And how frequently do you want that backup to happen? That is your recovery point objective. How much data can you lose? So if you're like, we can't operate with 2 hours of lost data, then I have to back up every 2 hours to make sure that we meet your RPO. And then how fast do you need to be back up and running? If this server were to crash, how fast do you need to be up and running again? That is your recovery time objective, your RTO. And so what we do is we formalize those things so that they know, so they can communicate that, they can manage those expectations. The other questions we ask are like, what happens if a computer dies? Do you have a hot spare? What happens if a server dies? Do you have a spare? Let's say the Teton Dam floods again. What is your plan? And your business is gone. You have no facility for people to work from. Do you still plan on operating? If so, where? How? What is your plan? And those are the questions that we ask. And those are the things that we try to get business leaders to think about, because they're in denial. They're like, oh, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. We got to try to get the small business owners to think about those things. So if it does happen, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, we at least have something to work with, and so do they. So do you want to try to hit one more, or do you want to ask questions? One more? All right. Okay. So, did you know that the state of Idaho has laws that protect your private information? And that if a business acts negligently and your private information gets exploited, even if they're not like a medical practice or a school with HIPAA or a school with FERPA or under any other compliance, there are state statutes that say that they're called identity protection statutes. But if a business is negligent and your identity is stolen, then they can be fined like $25,000. So most small businesses aren't aware of that. I would venture to bet most people in the room aren't aware of that, because I just learned that like a month ago. So there's also cyber insurance requirements. That's the one that we're really trying to push now. We're like, send us your cyber insurance requirements, and we're going to tell you all the riders that you said you were doing that you're not, so that we can help you not get sued by your insurance provider or your claim denied. And then that way, if something happens, you're okay. Yeah. So let's say that like this is a new thing. This is a new development. I don't think it's happened a lot. But let's say that for years, and in a parallel, the defense supply chain is going to be going through this exact same thing. Because for 9 years, the defense supply chain has been saying we're implementing the cybersecurity and maturity matrix certification, CMMC, and the Department of Defense has been like, okay, whatever, like, yes, you said you have, and then they went and audited, and they're like, nobody did, and so now it's going to be part of the contract. Well, similarly, the Defense Department might not even let some companies bid anymore for their contracts because they were so negligent. But similarly for the insurance, in order to get the cyber insurance, there's a questionnaire that says, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. If you sign that you said you were doing that, and then you come back and you file a claim, based off of the fact that the actuarial tables that the insurance company is using are based off of the validation or the integrity of what you answered, they set premiums at a certain threshold. If you didn't do the things that they set your premiums based off of, they might be suing you for the premiums that you should have been paying if you had answered honestly. It's not happening a lot, but there have been reports of this happening now. PCI compliance, if you accept credit cards, it's some level, some scope, you have PCI compliance. Depending on the number of transactions is the level of compliance that you have to follow. Depending on the level of compliance you have to follow, your requirements change, but apparently that doesn't matter when you're taking a bingo game. No, just kidding.
You're still salty about getting that.
Oh, I am so salty. No.
Really have to pay attention to the provider of
Yeah.
the credit card.
Yeah.
I mean,
We-
we had to change twice because of PCI compliance.
Yeah.
And Square, the reason it's so popular is because they do the PCI compliance for you.
Yeah, your bank is your bank or your credit card vendor are the people who actually are holding you to it, and they're going to require you to fill out these quarterly, annual. Like I have to. We have some accounting firms. We have to run quarterly firewall tests and everything, and do attestations and stuff. It's not the easiest game, but that follows anyone who takes credit cards. And then industry specifics. Now, I don't know of a single medical practice who doesn't realize that they have to follow HIPAA, but I know of a lot of them who don't care. I ask special questions when I go to a new doctor. Yeah. We if you're not willing to follow our recommendations, we don't need you. I don't want to like yeah.
They have their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And a client that won't follow their advice who then possibly blame them.
Yep. Yeah, that's the other end of the litigation. I mentioned it. CPA firms have FTC safeguards. Department of Defense contractors pretty soon are going to find CMMC language in their contracts that requires that they have attestation. And because these are owner-operated businesses, most of them either aren't aware or they don't care until they do.
Do you have any federal clients, or clients that are federal contractors?
One. Well, I should no. I have three. I have one that's a DOE contractor, and then I have two that are directly they're CMMC level 1. They don't have any CUI, so we have to do audits for them and stuff.
The Army's starting a pilot program specifically for small businesses where they can use a verified external service provider that covers like 80 of the 116 or 112 controls for CMMC2, and they can inherit.
Yeah.
In other words, they don't have to go through, the small business have to pay $150,000, $180,000 to do a full-blown CMMC.
That's on Total Care's roadmap of journeys to take.
I'll get you the link if you're a verified external service provider.
So, but we're gonna just go to the final thoughts. The main takeaways, though, I didn't really talk a lot about it, but security can be scalable. We really do need to listen to the business's needs before we say that these are the security things that they have to have. But we also try to put in scalable solutions by default from our perspective. The other thing I didn't talk a lot about, because for whatever reason we didn't get into them. But most of our providers or clients, the small businesses, they don't have policies and procedures. And anyone who's been through any type of security certification, Security Plus, whatever it is, knows that there's administrative controls, technical controls, and physical controls. And you can't be compliant, you can't be secure without all three. And the administrative controls are severely lacking in small businesses. And that's probably the biggest thing that we need to work on. But we're so geared as a company towards the technical controls. And so that, and then the other thing that we really want to stress, especially with small businesses, is that security is a defense, not an expense. And trying to convince them of that is tough.
So this has been fantastic. I'd like to have everyone give a round of applause.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you myself, this is very close to me. I'll tell you a little more later. We'll have a short break. I assume there's people outside from some of the other talks, but they can come and catch you probably out in the hallway.
Sure.
Around town. You're going to be able to stay a little bit after?
Yeah, I'll stay a little bit.
Okay, good. And I'll definitely grab you. So once again, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Thanks, Zach. The other thing that's challenging is from a matter of scale.
So if I,
Let me have it back real quickly. Oh, is that? It's on now? Oh, is that? It's on now? Test, test, test. Oh, Rudy, yours go test, test.
Test, test. Is there a button I need to press? Test, test. Okay.
All right, here you go, Sam. So, yeah, no button you need to press.
Oh, I accidentally pressed the button now. Press it again. There we go. Okay.
Blue lights is good.
Good.
Hello? Hello?
This better be good.
Hey. Yeah, no pressure. Hey,
So I was saying, so your ringer over there, we should all be the other.
that's what I hear.
We're just gonna direct all the questions to her.
Yeah, no, she was grilling us during our practice.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, that's no fair. You took my note and then made stickers and didn't give me one?
Bringing audio up. I can pause further if you need more time.
I think we are ready
All right.
when you
Oh,
are.
Okay, okay.
So,
Let me come over here. Close the door.
you know what? Just one thing. So, here, I'm going to set power.
You guys almost ready? I see you still plugging things in.
Yeah, we are ready.
Taking over the world. Okay. All right. So this is the final talk of the day here in track one, and we're going to be talking about understanding Volt Typhoon. I don't care what Jason Wright's saying over there. Everybody should. Right? Because we really do need to understand Volt Typhoon because it is once and future. It's going to be everywhere. But observations and detection strategies for critical infrastructure defenders. Sam Farnan and Jim Sokovnik, both from that low-level national laboratory that we call home, the best of the labs. In case I need to get the best of the labs.
That's right.
Yeah.
And those of you that will be back here someday. Anyway, guys, take it away.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Sam. This is Jim. And today we're going to talk about Volt Typhoon and kind of maybe some, like what it is, how they operate, maybe some things you can do to detect them as a defender. Who here knows what Volt Typhoon is, by the way? Just, okay, pretty healthy. So our agenda, we'll have 3 real quick main takeaways in case you do want to go to the other talk. The background, some observed TTPs, then detection strategies to go along with them, some closing thoughts and some questions. So we'll try to cram all this in. So our 3 main takeaways. As far as this threat goes, TTPs and behavioral indicators are going to be a lot better for you than just static IOCs like hashes and stuff, especially because this actor makes a lot of use of living off the land. Making sure everybody knows what living off the land is, correct?
Can you say what a TTP is?
Tactic, technique, and procedure. So, in living off the land, it's LOTL, often abbreviated. It's basically using stuff that's on a system for malicious purposes. So you're not bringing in a payload to do something, right?
So if there's a Python interpreter on a device you compromise.
Sure.
Yep.
Windows, you don't need a lot of that for Windows. It's already bad enough. Anyways, so, and then host-based logs, kind of tailing off that, are going to be more useful than your network-based logs. And we'll go into that a little later of why the network is, at least for this adversary, is a very difficult way to pursue this. And then vulnerabilities of internet-facing devices like your firewalls and your VPNs are increasingly becoming a problem for defenders. So Volt Typhoon, the first time anyone ever heard this name was May 2023, when Microsoft put out a report that said Volt Typhoon is using living off the land to persist in critical infrastructure environments, right? Later that year, CISA put out some more detailed reporting from some engagements that they apparently had been on. And the reason why this is important is because they're using very stealthy techniques. And from the former director of the FBI, he said, and I'm sorry to read this off the slide, China's hackers are positioning on American infrastructure in preparation to wreak havoc and cause real-world harm to American citizens and communities in the event of a crisis or a conflict. Okay? So in the event they're being stealthy, right, you know, that's something you might associate with like cyber espionage, right? So like stealing stuff and not getting caught. But when they're in local energy, electric, water, wastewater treatment plants, some telecommunications and transportation systems, that's not really a juicy espionage target, is it? Like, not that there's nothing there, but they're trying to stay there. They're trying to be unnoticed for as long as possible. Okay, some observed TTPs, and thank you for asking me what that meant. If anyone has anything like that, please just stop us, let us know. They use complex proxy or orb networks, which we will get into later in the presentation, basically to obfuscate their network activity. Their initial access, and this is what's, you know, one of the sticking points of this presentation, is believed to be via vulnerable network edge devices, right? So again, your firewalls, your VPN appliances, some routers. And then once they have initial access, they have extensive hands-on keyboard using living off the land after initial access. So they're using what's on the system to do stuff, find things out, move around, steal stuff, and then leave, right? This is interesting because there's almost no use of malware. So again, like EDRs are great, but if somebody's not using customized payload or malware, like, you know, those hash signatures aren't really going to get you too far, right? The crux of their campaign is generally the compromise of Active Directory credential stores. Everybody know what Active Directory is? Okay, cool.
Is that a Windows thing? Is that like
Yeah, it's like the white pages of Windows, I guess, if I really was looking for a crude metaphor. Anyways,
for users? Services use that to authenticate and know who they're talking to as
Mhm.
well? Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And then as well, they have infrequent access and actions once they have on target. So they'll be there during normal and abnormal business hours. So that's kind of a pain to hunt for, right? Okay, so detection challenges. There's no silver bullet for living off the land. It's very difficult to detect. It's very time intensive for somebody to kind of, you know, figure out like how to tune these alerts and behavioral alerts, which we'll get into. And again, because they don't use malware, like your IOCs are probably not going to be all that helpful, right? You know,
Sorry, IOC is
indicator of compromise. And then traditional network-based IOCs, so like an IPv4 or a domain, are not very useful because of these complex orb networks, which stands for Operational Relay Box Network, which we'll get into later in the presentation. Behavioral detections are kind of really what you got left, and it's really a lot of work to kind of tune those for them to be useful, right? They require not just a lot of data, but the right data, and for you to keep it for the right amount of time, which we'll have a meme there in a second. But then the question to ask yourself when you're looking for Volt Typhoon or living off the land, because living off the land is not new, like, but they're making extensive use of it in organizations that generally maybe don't have the best resources or detection. So why would a legitimate admin do this is when you're looking for this stuff. To kind of look at this from another perspective, SANS has a two-stage, what they call their ICS kill chain. The first one on the yellow is generally like what you would consider an enterprise. So they're going to get in, they're going to move around, they're going to steal some documents, or in this case, because it's critical infrastructure, you know, operational schematics, stuff like that, right? They're going to try to maintain persistence and then leave, right? All that feeds into the second phase, which is basically where they're going to take what they stole, develop some sort of payload to cause a cyber, kinetic, physical, pick your word there, effect in a real world environment, right? So everything that we have seen publicly, Volt Typhoon is very much stage one. It's very Windows centric. So just to kind of manage expectations here. A meme for some fun. So I talked about logs. Like, you need the right data, and that is a lot of log that Jim will go into. But you need the correct things to hunt for this activity, right? The Sisyphean task of looking for this with either incomplete or like non-existent logs, it's a lot like trying to nail Jello to the wall. It's just really not going to be a good time. And then on the flip side of this too, there is somewhat of a legitimate business case for not having all these logs because, especially with living off the land, 99.99, pick your number, whatever percent, is not going to be malicious because these are just normal users and admins doing their day-to-day stuff, right? So generally, you kind of have to make a business decision where you can keep logs longer, you can have more stuff in the logs, or you can pay less money, right? So pick two because security teams don't have infinite security budgets.
Right, and this is assuming that they haven't compromised the machine or the device enough that they can erase the logs.
They,
Right, well,
they do wipe logs. We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll address that as well.
Yeah. Okay, Jim.
Yeah. So, right, there's lots of different types of logs on any given endpoint, whether it's Windows or Linux. They all have different meanings, and math is a cruel mistress. Maybe 100 megabytes a day of logs from a single endpoint. Well, whatever. We've got terabytes of storage. Well, okay, multiply it times 10,000, and suddenly, you've got a bigger problem, or 30,000, however many endpoints. And that's an arbitrary made up number. Some will generate less, some will generate more. But point is, you can't capture everything. And it's also like with network traffic, it's generally simpler. You just say, I want to, put in a tap. I'm going to capture everything across this switch or a span port or whatever, right? And you can ask questions later, right? You don't have to make a lot of decisions. You can filter traffic up front, but generally people just slurp up everything and ask questions later. With Windows, with endpoint logs though, you do have to make decisions about what do you want to collect and from which hosts. And so designing logging policies that make sense for different groups of endpoints and so on, and that will scale well. And then how am I going to get them from here to there? Do I have enough bandwidth? And do I have enough storage over there? And how long do I want to be able to keep them? Certainly, you also have to consider that with network traffic. You can't keep all the PCAP forever either. But anyway, there's more to consider here, is what I'm getting at. So for this campaign, if I had to pick one type of log, it would, without question, be PowerShell script block logs. However, the other two are important as well. So Windows security event logs. There are lots and lots of event IDs if you ever have gone looking in your event logs. So they're kind of broken into, you've got security, application, system, and there are some others. And then within each of those, you've got a provider, one or more providers. And then you get into all the different event IDs. And anyway, so one that is of particular relevance here is 4688. By the way, I did not have these all memorized because there's too many. But that one is process creation. And what that can tell you is when a process is launched, what were the command line arguments that were launched with it. By the way, that part is not enabled by default. So again, there has to be like, you have to want to do this. There is an alternative to that one, which is Sysmon Event ID 1. Sysmon is part of the sysinternals suite, very powerful set of tools for all kinds of system administration tasks, and has become very popular in, I guess, the security industry because A, it's free, and B, it's highly customizable. You can kind of tailor your own config and annotate logs, etc. So we could have a whole other talk on just Sysmon, but for now, those are some of the ones we're going to focus on during this talk. I'll give you a moment with the meme. So yeah, unfortunately, no single log is going to tell you a whole story, right? It's a data point. And the event ID is not by itself even of one particular significance. The contents of the log can matter depending on, and usually does, depending on what the event is. You have to look at the big picture. So, okay, weren't sure exactly where to put this, but this is kind of an overview of the Volt Typhoon intrusion set and the behaviors. So, and I'll give you a moment to digest that. And I think I kick it back over to Sam here in a minute. But
so we're going to follow this roughly through the presentation. We're going to follow this kill chain from initial access to a lot of the tools and stuff like valid credentials for persistence, all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of a tricky way to do this order, but we're going to cover as much as we can.
I've just noticed I had a CISA reference. This is from the CISA, latest CISA paper on the Volt Typhoon.
Okay, so initial access. All the public reporting has Volt Typhoon generally leveraging either 0 days or N days against vulnerable network edge devices. So your firewalls, VPN appliances, something that basically faces the internet and anyone can do anything or send anything to.
What was it that you said for 0 day?
N day.
N days. So
Basically, there's a vulnerability that's been published, but hasn't, like the person that has the thing hasn't been patched. So it's been like 247 days, or pick your number, right? So sorry. Thank you though. So essentially, once they compromise this device, they will see what kind of privileges or connections this device has to other servers. So in Volt Typhoon's case, it's primarily Active Directory, right? But we did want to throw something up here because it illustrates the point a little bit better or more. But who's heard of Salt Typhoon?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Salt Typhoon, they were also leveraging vulnerable network edge devices, right? And they were able to, it's a little bit different than what they were doing with Active Directory, but kind of the overall concept is the same. As they were able to sniff vulnerable traffic, plain text traffic, and look for credentials, encryption keys, all sorts of stuff, right? For follow-on operations, which is why I underlined that. And we don't have a recommendation for this because this is kind of a big problem. Everyone's kind of trying to get their hands around it, but essentially these devices, real quick question, who knows their router's firmware right now? Okay, well, we know Rita, but like that's kind of what I thought. Like these devices are an afterthought, wouldn't you say? Like, so the implicit trust these things have with like Active Directory or other authentication servers, these can't be an afterthought anymore, right? And they're everywhere. So some things to just consider is basically kind of know what you have, first of all, but also be ready to rapidly patch or take this offline. Watch the Kev, right, to see if that comes up. But as well, like, know if your vendor requires a proprietary tool to do any investigation with or an integrity checker. Yes?
I think you should say what Kev is.
Kev,
Known exploited.
I was going to say key, but known exploited vulnerabilities. I'm going to hear about that later.
Yeah, that's a catalog from CISA that they've been continuously adding to, and it's something worth paying attention to. And of course, even more so, if they issue an emergency directive to federal agencies to patch within 24 hours, everybody else should probably take notice of that too and do the same thing. You're not mandated to, but it would be very
in
wise
your best interest
if you have that device or software exposed.
Okay.
Okay, so getting into the tradecraft, we're going to go a little bit deeper. We're not going to cover everything in the report. The report's very good, and I highly encourage you to go read it. But we're going to pick out a few examples. Okay, so this is a PowerShell script that they ran. Once they got in, right, they got initial access. Now they're looking around. This is what we call discovery, kind of figuring out where they're at. And they do some of that with simple commands like "Who am I?" for instance, is one of them, which regular users don't typically run a lot. So it's kind of weird. But anyway, with this script, they're going deeper and they're trying to figure out pattern of life. You can see, so 4624. I don't have Windows event IDs memorized. There are a few exceptions, but that is the security event ID for a successful logon. So what they're looking for are successful logon events, and they're querying the domain controller for these specifically. And so they are getting a sense of, okay, Well, if I'm going to be stealing a bunch of credentials I want to come back and use later, or I already have, I am going to, I would like to know when the owner of each of these accounts is active and using them, so I can blend in at similar timeframes. And that's really the gist of this. But again, they run a lot of things in the context of PowerShell console, which is why the script block logging is so important. Yeah, I won't go any deeper on the PowerShell logging, but yeah. So next up, credential access and C2 with WMIC. And so who's familiar with WMI? So it's called Windows, stands for Windows Management Instrumentation, and WMIC is the command line version of that. And it's actually deprecated. It's disabled by default in Windows version 10, H11, something. I don't remember the exact version, but it continues to be disabled by default in Windows 11, but it's still there and it can be used, but it's not used very often. WMI, on the other hand, is used a lot still. And in fact, many PowerShell commandlets are based on WMI functionality. So anyway, these screenshots come from the Microsoft report. And the first one is showing them creating manually with this command lines arguments here, this set of commands, they're creating remotely domain controller installation media. So I know it's probably a little hard to see, but on the bottom left of that first screenshot, they're using the NTDS util tool. And then just after that, you see IFM. And I mean, there's other arguments, right? But basically that is telling it to, hey, I want to make a new domain controller without using like domain controller replication. And we'll talk later about why they're doing that, because why don't they just go grab ntds.dit, right? Well, it's not that easy. Okay, the second example, they're setting up proxy to proxy their traffic out to their C2 on a particular port. And they're using the port proxy tool. Again, these are native tools. And then they delete it. So you could argue that's defense evasion as well. But in any case, so how would you detect this? Well, again, if this is happening in the context of PowerShell, you want PowerShell script block logging. I'll say it again and again. However, within the context of PowerShell, you run WMIC, well, that's going to launch a WMIC process as well. And so you're going to get a process creation log. And you would see these details in that, those command line arguments. And so what should you look for? Well, in those logs, I mean, first of all, recognize this, ask yourself, is this commonly used in my environment, right? That's why you want to be collecting this data continuously so that you know, have I ever seen this before? And if so, where and by whom? And is this user's first time running it or trying to run it? And so on. Maybe there's a little bit of activity and then you see a spike. Okay, that should get your attention. Typos indicate, hey, this isn't like a polished script. This is somebody's typing, hands on keyboard interactively. And there were typos observed. Now, legitimate admins can also make typos. So it's just a data point, but it becomes part of the narrative. And, over time you can start to, that can help you in your investigation. Okay, so this is kind of a, so this slide is about LSAS, dumping LSAS. Who's familiar with LSAS? So it's a Windows process that basically stores your logon credentials when you log into the computer. So obviously very sensitive. Those are gonna be in memory. And so if somebody is trying to dump specifically the process memory of the LSAS process, that's highly suspicious. And by the way, if you have an EDR, an endpoint detection and response tool, it had better catch that if it does nothing else. So this is what like Mimikatz is known to do. In fact, they have been observed using Mimikatz in rare circumstances, but mostly not. They also were oddly observed using the magnet RAM capture tool. Magnet Forensics is a pretty well-known digital forensics company, and they have free tools and paid tools. But this is a free one, and this is something that like the blue team would use when you're investigating. It's pretty unusual though for someone to be dumping memory. You usually have a reason to do it, and so that should definitely raise red flags as well. Like if you're not aware of an investigation going on, and you see somebody dumping memory, like that's weird. So anyway, the recommendations here are, again, pay attention to any alerts related to this type of activity, certainly. And as always, scrutinize your domain controllers. And that includes looking for legitimate tools, especially if they're running from non-standard directories. So yeah, this is not comprehensive, but this is, I would say, a good portion of the command line based utilities that Volt Typhoon has been observed using. A lot of these are for discovery, but many of them are executed in the context of PowerShell. Again, so PowerShell logs, and don't just be logging them. Yes.
I was going to say, so, as a new sysadmin of an organization, those are some of the commands that you use just to find out what it is that you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to know, right?
Absolutely. So these, right, things like, again, who am I? Ping, task list, net user, that sort of thing. So yeah, you can look these up. And in fact, we'll reference a website called LOLBAS, Living Off the Land Binaries and Scripts. There's a whole website it's been around for years. Talks about a lot of the common utilities can be dual use, can be potentially used to inform threat actor behavior. So don't just have the PowerShell logging. I mean, that's step one. It used to be, by the way, script block logging has not been around forever. That was only added in PowerShell version 5, which happened, I don't know, several years ago. But and even then, it wasn't enabled by default. So there are all these little things. Yes. Good question. PowerShell is like the big brother, big sister to the command prompt. It's got super powerful. You can script a lot of things that would otherwise take you a lot of time. So it's very popular for system administrators, people who manage all the computers on a network. Great question. So you want to aggregate these for a couple of reasons. First of all, as you said, right, if somebody's somebody could tamper with the logs. They could delete the logs where they're generated. Well, if I'm forwarding them, I still have a copy over here. Also, it creates the opportunity by co-locating disparate data sets. My gosh, imagine trying to do an investigation across, let's say you've got 5,000 endpoints, right? And you're not sure how many of them are compromised. And anyway, you need to look at the event logs. You're going to go to each individual machine and launch Event Viewer. You're going to have a really bad time. But by co-locating them in a SIEM, security incident and event management system like Splunk or Elasticsearch or ArcSight, whatever, that gives you the opportunity to correlate those and to do interesting groupings and filtering and correlations and visualizations and build a timeline in one place, right? So you can start to understand the narrative of what a particular user is doing, what machines they're touching, and so on. So, and this kind of gets at what we describe as a behavioral detection, right? It's not an IP address or a file hash or a domain. It's a set of things that somebody did.
Or even one event ID. Like that's not going to tell you everything.
Right, right. Yep. So they didn't just clear the event logs. They logged in here. They remote desktoped over there. They explored these directories or copied these files. And by the way, while this presentation is very host focused, that's not to say don't capture network traffic. Absolutely capture network traffic. Use something like Malcolm, which by the way, shameless plug, we develop at INL. It's free. We could have I've got a whole other slide deck on that, but and that basically glues together things like Zeek, Suricata, et cetera, and aggregates those from one or more sensors so that you can figure out what's going on the network. And so in my mind, sort of the best detections are those that aggregate disparate but related data sets to tell a story, and that raises the confidence of the analytic that you're creating, the detection that you're crafting. Okay, we're gonna try to keep moving here. Remote desktop has been observed, but of course there's many mechanisms for that, and it is used legitimately all the time. But what constitutes an outlier, right? Maybe a user that they've got the privileges, but they never use it, and now they're using it. Or they didn't used to be in this group, and now they're in this group, and they're using it, okay? So things that like just don't feel right. And yeah.
Yeah, when you say the compromised credentials, are these typically like a password, or is it like public key? You know?
Mostly password, like like username, password.
Yep.
From
Correct.
what we've read.
Which, by the way, and I think
they're not using like a hardware, Chaplain Nebby key kind of thing.
right. So this is where MFA becomes really important, right? And so yeah, that's an excellent mitigation against this.
MFA applies to a couple slides that we go over. So yeah.
And I say disallow PSExec wherever possible. That's kind of I don't know why I'm calling out that one in particular. The real idea there is try to not use 17 different system administrator tools that could do the same task. Try to limit it down so that if somebody uses one that is not the one that you use, that by itself can throw a flag. PSExec is also part of systemternals, by the way, and it's popular because it's been around forever. It's well known. It works for a lot of things, but it's also kind of clunky anyway, and similar to WMIC. A lot of people, I think, would consider it sort of so old it should be deprecated, but it's still around anyway. Okay, so getting to the crux of this whole campaign, right? The big credential dump, going after ntds.dit. So they're doing this a couple ways, so the first is NTDS util. We saw the example of that to create installation media from domain controllers. The other is the volume shadow copy service. So there's a command line utility called bssadmin. Well, first of all, who's familiar with volume shadow copies? Not sure why you would be unless you're, yeah. So they are, it's kind of like, they used to call it like a restore point, I think, in Windows XP. Basically, it's in the background under certain circumstances when maybe nobody's really using the computer. It's like, okay, I'm gonna create a little restore point so that the user can get back to where they were quickly. It includes all of the files on that volume, including, for a domain controller, you guessed it, ntds.dit, which, by the way, is kind of shorthand for, anytime we say that, we really mean also the system registry key, which contains the boot key, which is how you decrypt the ESE database that is ntds.dit. So they need both of those things. And that's what they went after. But yeah, but why are they doing it in this convoluted way? Well, that file is locked pretty much always, as long as Active Directory is running, which is always. So they can't just grab it. So they make a copy of something that they know will include a copy of that file, and then they can pluck it out of there where it doesn't have the same protections. It's not locked. But yeah, I didn't know this, to be honest, until recently, but there are some logs that can tell you about, they're not specifically about ntds.dit. They're specifically about ESE databases, of which ntds.dit is an example. So these fall in the application event logs, and they are specifically from the eSent provider, and they will tell you, I took out the event IDs, you can look them up in the report, but if the database has moved, if it is, there's a new one in a non-standard directory, or if it's mounted specifically from a volume shadow copy. So, people at Microsoft, okay, we can gripe about a lot of things they do, but they recognize some of these risks and the fact that, or I don't know, maybe it's dumb luck, and but yeah. So these are meaningful, but only if it's talking about ntds.dit. I mean, okay, there might be other sensitive ESE databases that you'd care about, but for Volt Typhoon, you care about that. But understand, of course, credentials don't last forever. They should expire at least. And so if somebody wants to maintain stealthy persistence with valid credentials, they will have to come back. They will have to dump it again because those credentials will get stale. They will expire. They will change. And so that's something that you should be looking for all the time and understand may happen more than once if you're targeted.
Something else really quick.
Yeah.
We don't talk about a lot of OT in this presentation, frankly, because there's not a lot of OT stuff in this presentation. But Active Directory lives in both IT and OT. So if you take nothing else, MFA all the things first, but definitely segment Active Directory. Have separate one for your OT environment versus your IT environment, because if the IT gets popped, you don't want one being able to compromise the other, right? OT is operational technology. So think of like things that control PLCs, programmable logic controllers, that essentially oversee or execute a physical process.
Yeah, and going back to this slide, I want to foot stomp that because this is commonly misunderstood, right? I think the campaign got a lot of attention because of the attribution to PRC by CISA and FBI.
People's Republic of China.
People's Republic of China, thank you, and the fact that they're targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. However, if you read the report, there's no specific observations of them interacting with the operational technology side of the network. They go right up to the edge. They describe having access to PuTTY sessions, PuTTY being an SSH client for secure shell access to OT systems, but they do not actually log into them. It's not described in the report. So that's a common misconception. Fortunately, they didn't take that extra step. That doesn't mean that they couldn't. Could mean they're waiting or whatever, but go ahead.
So did the report explicitly say that never happened, or did it not say whether or not it happened?
It did not say that it happened. So,
Yes.
So it could have happened and they just chose not to say so.
Yeah, and this is one of those things to where we're going back to the geopolitical side, is they want to do this in the event of a crisis or a conflict. Taiwan may or may not be in that mix, but you get my point. Like, they wouldn't just do this, to do it, right? They want to do this to potentially hold a U.S. response to something in the Indo-Pacific and Bay.
You get to do it once.
That's right.
Hopefully
Yeah.
once.
Yeah.
Hopefully once.
Well, and hopefully not at all. But
Yeah.
So,
Back
but
to
yeah,
TDS
just want to make sure that there isn't that misconception. So it's still very concerning, right? But at least, but also, again, why are we still talking about this 2 years later? These TTPs you can't patch for them, right? They're using native functionality. Also, it's not just one edge device that's been compromised. If you look at the KEV, there's a marked trend of roughly 1 in 5 entries to the KEV have been related to VPNs or firewalls or enterprise routers that are meant to be publicly exposed. So that's a big deal. I mean, these things are born with a target on their back, right? It's not a secret. They're marketed for facing the dirty internet, right? And it's not that hard to get your hands on them and reverse engineer them. And well, won't speak to the level of difficulty, but for the reverse engineering side, I'm sure that can be challenging, but the buying it is not so hard. And so expect that these things will continue to be targeted. It's just kind of a fact of life. So, all right, getting back to tradecraft, there's definitely observations of defense evasion. Kind of the textbook one is clearing the security event logs, which generates event ID 1102, which says that they've been cleared. But yeah, there are other examples as well. Again, this is why you forward your logs. And notably, the only reported persistence mechanism is valid credentials, which is unusual because if you get access to something that you really, really want, what's the worst thing that could happen? You lose access to it, right? So usually, a threat actor will want to sink their claws in multiple places. So if they get kicked out from one area, they've, next time this box reboots, I've got a scheduled task that's going to kick off and beacon back home so I can get my tools back on box, right? Not the case here, right? They're very dedicated to laying low with valid credentials. So that's notable.
So I mentioned orb networks, which again are operational relay box networks, right? So we mentioned these earlier, and this is in part, and we tailed this off of valid credentials to kind of, drive home a point where these things are basically if like botnets and VPNs kind of like combined and we kind of came something weird, but there are multiple orb networks that Chinese actors, Volt Typhoon and other ones, use to do their various things, right? This graphic is from Mandiant. I'm not smart enough to make that, but this is a general, like what they look like. So they'll come from the back end in China, hop over the Great Firewall, which I guess just had a big leak, bounce through a bunch of different stuff, and that can be leased VPSs, end-of-life routers, IoT devices, right? There's different, like, as Manny calls them, anatomies, but generally this is the concept to just get across. So,
Yeah,
and then their exit node is generally, they will try to get it in geographic proximity of a target, right? So a popped router, say in that city, okay? So if you're only using valid credentials for persistence, that compromised router is going to go through NAT and an ISP in normal use by that victim. If you don't have MFA, that is going to be a nightmare to hunt for, right? So these things are made up of thousands, right? They can churn C2, they can churn exit nodes, so they can just change it up, right? This is something to just consider because network stuff is great. We're not trying to dog it, like please don't take that away, but for this particular threat, doing this particular form of persistence with valid creds and using this, like your time is better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, this is really cool, and also you mentioned the leak of the Great Firewall recently. Also, it called to mind cyber contractors in China also had some leaks. It kind of just gave some insight into the maturity of that whole market.
Yeah,
over there.
Of interest, these are not run, but the orb networks in general, and there's a lot of since the initial Volt Typhoon reporting, there's been a lot of good reporting coming out on these networks because people were kind of trying to understand how the Chinese went from very, very noisy cyber actors to very, very stealthy, right? So they kind of made this jump to, being very difficult to detect and hunt for. But these are maintained by private companies in China. They have been listed in certain indictments by the DOJ, and then also some of the other like security vendors. Black Lotus Labs by Lumen Technologies is a great resource for some of these. And the particular orb network that Volt Typhoon was attributed to using was called the KV botnet, right? And again, just so I don't land in hot water, Mandy made this graphic, not me.
Yeah, and the reporting on the cyber industry in China, that was of course all open source.
Okay.
I can find a reference for that. But.
We didn't do you guys any favors making the reading list super small, but you can ask us anytime. But we have the Microsoft and CISA reports. We have the LawBass project, which is the Living Off the Land Binaries and Scripts project that has everything you could ever want to know about native Windows, and also Unix and Mac binaries that you could do that are dual purpose. I'm representing the lab, so I'm not going to say those next two, but also Black Lotus Labs and Lumen.
They're really interesting projects, though. GTFO bins is the Unix equivalent of the LawBoss project, and the WTF bins are lesser. This is a lesser known thing, maybe a little newer, but benign applications that exhibit suspicious behavior. So I thought I appreciate that exists, because there are plenty of weird things that they're legit, but they do weird stuff.
And then for listening viewing, Dan Gunter from Insane Cyber has a couple really good YouTube videos on how to detect law bins within kind of the nature of industrial environment. So that's within the OT environment, right? Joe Slowick from Data Miner has a talk called Typhoon in a Teacup. And this kind of looks at the reporting of this and basically how there was so much hype against this, and it's not because it's wrong, but they're like, get ready to do, please address these issues. But in reality, I think everybody knows Volt Typhoon is not the only ones that look to compromise Active Directory or use PowerShell or use PSExec. Ransomware gangs do this like daily. So in one way or another, right? So that's something to also consider. And then the orb networks by the principal analyst at Mandiant that wrote the initial reporting on this.
So I want to add to your listening list for those of you who want the kind of broader aspect, to catch a thief, right? Rebecca, Nicole, what her name is. Thank you. That is a fantastic set to understand how China has kind of progressed in their.
Yep.
I haven't heard of that. I'll look that up.
It's really good.
Yeah.
And then we like to read the book "Winning Without Fighting" by Rebecca Patterson. That talks about China's role. But you had a question over there for a long time.
Oh gosh.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Why does Volt Typhoon try to get into computers and stuff?
That's a great question.
They want to basically the computers are getting into, we'll just say, are very important to like U.S. national security, especially in the Indo-Pacific regions, like the Pacific Ocean, right? The computers aren't in the Pacific Ocean, but yeah.
And that was called out.
Careful what you say here.
Yeah.
Because now we'll be quoted.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was called out in the reporting too.
Okay.
It did not go unnoticed.
Yeah. Basically, they want
yeah.
to cause a disruption in the event of a crisis or conflict with the United States for whatever reason.
So
It's gonna be dangerous.
yeah, we can only
Yeah.
speculate to their true intent, but we have to assume conservatively that they mean us harm.
So you guys are.
We got one more slide.
Yeah.
And if there's any chance for a question before I yank you off.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay, so closing thoughts. We've talked about it a couple times, but please maintain a vulnerability management policy for these edge devices that your organizations rely on, really. So watch the KEV. So that's probably the number one takeaway for that one.
And have a plan, and also deeper in your network, consider having a different firewall. I know that is painful to hear for network administrators who, the reason they pay big bucks for Palo Alto or Cisco is so that they can manage everything. Everything's the same, right? They can manage it from one spot, but having, a little bit of diversity of different technologies can be part of a defense in depth strategy. So keep that in mind. But yeah, in addition to that, right, think about your logging. It should be intentional. You should be aggregating it somewhere. Start small. Don't just dump everything in without a thought. Do the hard work up front, and it'll pay off. Host-based data, again, for this is going to be more valuable just because most of the observed behaviors happened like on box and wouldn't have shown up in network traffic. Build behavioral detections. Again, we talked about what those are. And then track where your admin credentials are used, because anytime somebody logs in, remember those credentials are going to be in memory somewhere. That's another place that they're at risk. And so there are a variety of technologies out there to help mitigate that risk. But yeah, finally, public service announcement. Those botnets are real, and they're composed of small office and home office routers. So if you have a really old TP-Link or whatever it is, switch out there, do yourself and the world a favor by replacing it, like sometime.
Or even just unplugging it.
Because
It's
the
just
FBI has
long.
done unprecedented things that required extraordinary privileges to be granted to go patch people's routers for them because nobody was doing it. And I mean, that is just kind of crazy. That's where we're at. But I mean, it's a powerful tool that is being used against us in aggregate. So yeah, keep your stuff patched.
So particularly for consumer edge devices like you said, routers, is there any good way to know when they're at end of life?
Manufacturers will push that out. Like you have to, I was doing some stuff. You have to kind of dig on their website, but you can find it. There might be some other like third parties that pull from that, and there's a database you can look at. But generally, the manufacturers, I think, are required to put that out, or at least notify people when end of life versus end of services. So, that answer your question?
Go like this. bunch of dust flies. It's probably time.
That's probably time. Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Speak up.
The selling point of your talk was importance of post logs. Can you talk about how to sort through them, something like signals or something?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So depending on what SIEM you're using, there's different query languages, different analytic capabilities. But yeah, you want to make sure that they're being parsed consistently and are and yeah, there are tools out there like Sigma, which is kind of meant to be the universal language of SIEMs, that you can kind of it's YAML based, and you can define rules very easily in those. And they kind of compare it to Yara for logs, if you're familiar with Yara.
Does anyone know what Yara stands for?
Yet another.
Yeah, yet another ridiculous acronym.
Recursive acronym.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And it's basically pattern matching for files. So yeah, there's a lot of good resources out there. The Splunk Surge team publishes awesome research on threat hunting. And yeah, there's all kinds of people writing great stuff out there on like medium.com and stuff like that. So, but yeah, always keep in mind that, strive to correlate and build robust detections.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I'd like to thank Jim and what's your name?
Sam.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Jim and Sam. Please give them a warm round of applause. I'm sure they'll be around for extra questions outside or for others.
Yeah. Thank you all.
We're happy with that. We should probably.
Oh, thank you. Oh, hey. Yeah, hey. Thanks. You bet.
My company I work for has been really concerned about salt typhoon.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the reason we're all using Signal, right?
I wouldn't call it panic mode, but we've been in just absolute, really shipping stuff fast.
Mhm.
A lot of things how we work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Put in some temporary mitigations. I don't know if you're
yeah. Yep.
Put in some temporary
I think they're gonna publish the talk.
mitigations.
I can give you my email because a lot of this stuff is like
Every
admittedly out there, but it's also
user that logs into devices.
yeah,
It's,
it'd be nice to just have a
password is rotated daily.
Mhm.
It's unique for every device.
Wow. Yeah.
with your what?
Yeah. It's pretty
And,
rigorous.
because the problem
Hey.
is when,
Do you want to turn off your microphone?
Hold on. Oh, gosh. I forgot about the microphone. Thank you.
I can go hands free.
Yes, please do.
A lot of it was hype.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. I don't know what to give it to, but Joseph, oh, he's not there. Okay, I'll keep it. Well, this is nice. It's got so magnetic lavalier.
See this?
It doesn't work. It was crap about it because I was trying to wear it up here. And
So you're gonna run home and come back?
oh man, I probably should. How late are y'all staying out?
Well, if you look at it, I think you said that
It starts at 7. So what are you just doing out at 7? Oh.
But actually, I'm probably gonna come back by 6.
You going home first?
No, I gotta go home.
Do you want to sit on home first?
You think?
Honestly, it is. Like they're just using it as
It's too hard to come out, so I gotta go get my ice.
Yeah, and I think it's like,
Yeah, I mean, the first
We're still serious.